There aren't any announcements as such myself, apart from the fact, of course, that this meeting will be recorded. So if you can make sure that our microphones are switched to mute unless speaking, make sure that our mobile phones are switched off. And if you wish to ask a question or to make an intervention, then please raise your electronic hand. Item 2 on the agenda this afternoon is declarations of interest. Can I ask, therefore, if any members have any interest to declare? I don't see any. So if that's the case, we'll move on to item 3 then, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. And these are on pages 5 to 24. So the first meeting was on the 10th of July. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? I don't see any hands up, so I'm assuming people are happy. Could I therefore have a proposer, please, that we accept the minutes? Raise your hand.
Happy to propose, Chair.
Yeah, diolch Edward, proposer. And somebody happy to second?
Dwi'n fodlon eilio cadeirydd. Diolch yn fawr.
Yeah, great. Diolch yn fawr. So we've got a proposer and a second there. Could I therefore ask members to show by raising your hands if you're happy to accept? Great. Diolch yn fawr. And then similarly with the 9th of October minutes, are there any comments on the accuracy first of all? I don't see any hands up, so if that's the case, can I ask then for a proposer again to accept these as a correct record?
Let's go for a doubler then, Chair.
Yeah, good work, Edward, thank you very much. And a seconder, please.
Second those, Darren.
Yeah, please, thank you very much. And can again ask the members to show by raising their hands if they're happy to formally accept. Great. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. So we move on then to item 4, which is the first substantive item on the agenda this afternoon, which is the Transport for Wales Regional Priorities Overview for Rail and Bus Services. The paper starts on page 25 of the agenda, and we have Ben George and colleagues from Transport for Wales here. I will ask them to present shortly. Mike, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, dwi'n credu bod rhaid fi ymddiheurio achos dwi ddim ar ran y Parc Cenedlaethol, ond sy'n fot i gael gyda fi. So dwi wedi eilio cofnodion a sa'n siŵr os bod hawl gyda fi i... So dwi'n ymddiheurio chi cadeirydd.
Ie, na, mae hwnna'n iawn, right, dim problem o gwbl. Ni wedi bod yn hwnna'n ffain, oedd yna gefnogaeth unfrydol i'r cynnig dy beth, so roedd nhw'n gweld problem yn hynny o beth, ond diolch am godi'r mater. Felly, ie, fel ni'n sôn, mae Ben George yma o Trafnidaeth i Gymru, ac felly gai ofyn i Ben i ddechrau'r cyflwyniad, a wedyn bydd yna gyfle wedyn i ni fel aelodau i ofyn cwestiynau ac i drafod yn dilyn ni. Felly, Ben, over to you, thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much. Whilst I start the preamble, Caris, if you could share our slide deck, that'd be very helpful. So thank you to all again for having us at CJC Transport Subcommittee. It's a great honour and a privilege to be with you in these early months and help and support your work. So I suppose just to recap, and this is a blur because there's a lot of these meetings, aren't there? We probably had our first substantive meeting with you last summer, where we set out rail priorities and sort of served to sort of, I suppose, give you a lot of the information of the analysis that Transport for Wales had done to inform you as you took your tentative steps in establishing rail priorities for the region. I think really we've not made as much progress on the bus front as we would have liked by this point, but we are, as you'll see shortly now, making some good steps into that area, and I'll hand over to my colleagues shortly. And colleagues, if you could introduce yourselves when you start presenting as well, for clarity, that'd be very helpful. I think just by way of a broad summary from myself as a programme manager for the Southwest region, I think it's worth me just congratulating you first and foremost on having your RTP implementation plan signed off and approved by CJC Transport Subcommittee at the end of October. It's no mean feat, is it, in these early days when you're establishing new governance like this to achieve that, and you're all forming, new working relationships, and so it is complex, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, but it's not gone without notice that the Southwest are making really good steps in that area, and I suppose just for the benefit of councillors, because I'm not sure if it was probably explicit in terms of the implementation plan you received. Transport for Wales had officers had prepared probably, I don't know, overstate our position, but maybe 70-80% of that document, and then sort of had highlighted for you at a regional level to say these are the pertinent issues you may want to consider. So without giving you a fait accompli in that sense, but just to get the ball rolling. So that worked very well on the implementation plan, and I think just suffice to say, from my point of view, and the services I'd look to bring and support in this area, we've got more transport planning capability coming into Transport for Wales shortly, and pleasingly, it seems to be that we're in conjunction with Welsh Government now able to offer those skills to you, and we internalise those costs in Transport for Wales. So obviously, we're going to have to work out how to moderate that support, because we have to share this resource around Wales. But certainly now, once the regional transport plan gets into its full development, pending the outcome of today's meeting, it seems likely that we will have specialist transport planning resource to do more of the sort of thing that we did with the implementation plan now going forward into the substantive plan itself. So I'm continuing to meet with your heads of service who are on the call here once a month. So we're in regular dialogue and liaison, and we'll certainly do what we can here to support you in your work, and obviously to implement the Welsh Government's policies over the coming months and ultimately through the plan itself. I think just to explain in terms of what we're presenting today, we weren't going to bring a substantive update to you really on the rail and bus front, although happy to pick that up after the slide deck if you wish. Today it was more focusing on we're able to provide transport planning capability, and it was just to show some of the work that we have in Transport for Wales that we can really gift to you to support the development of your regional transport plans. So obviously, as individual local authorities and the CJC as a whole, you want to represent those matters which are most pertinent to you at a local and at a regional level, isn't it? But then in recognition really of the fact that there's an awful lot of transport planning capability in Transport for Wales, is how do we extract those key skills and get them into your hands in an effective way. So we're learning how to do that as much as you are in terms of receiving those at the minute, but I think there's some good examples of some good work in that area. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, but by all means, I'm sure they'll agree, or perhaps grimace, I don't know. Happy to take your questions through the presentation or at the end in that sense, but thanks again. So Caris, I'll hand over to you.
Diolch. Hi all, nice to see you. So as Ben said, we're going to talk you through the Southwest Regional Transport Study today. I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Caris, I'm the project manager for Southwest Wales working on Ben's programme of works. This is a relatively recent study that we've just started looking into. So we commenced the study back in November. So it is as it says, in the very early stages, but we've made really great progress so far, which is why we want to present to you today some of our findings. So I'll start by explaining the aim of the study. Where we want to get to is effectively having a list of opportunities to improve the desirability of multimodal transport, and we'd like that to be across the region. To make it regional, we are looking at the bus data as a whole, but we're also working with each local authority as well. So we're having one-to-one meetings with the local authorities and their representatives to try and understand local knowledge. We understand that each authority has their own requirements. We don't expect any of the two authorities to be the same with regards to that. So those meetings are coming up starting this week, actually. So as I said, to get to that long list, we're looking at a few different approaches to that. So today we're going to talk you through the bus data that we've started gathering and understanding. And Owain will talk to that data in a lot more detail for you just now. Following on from analysing the best data, we want to overlay that with an understanding of car usage. So not just the travel patterns, but also the destinations, and analysing are the private transport destinations and routes reflected accurately in our best corridors. To overlay that further, we're also going to look into the active travel network, both existing and proposed, try and understand where there are points of interception between the networks and where there are opportunities for improvement there in itself as well. Also trying to tie that in with the rail network, with the timetabling, but also, and this is especially where we want to look at this with more of a local authority approaches, any areas for development as well. Could we pick up any improvements within the developments at this early stage to try and make multimodal transport more desirable to the public? The timeframes for achieving this, as I said, we commenced the study November last year. We've made significant progress to date in analysing the best data. So we've commenced drafting the report of the best data, and once we've got that finalised, we'll be sharing that with each of the local authorities and hopefully with yourselves as well if you're interested. And where we are with it at the moment is, as mentioned, we're having those conversations with the local authorities due to commence this week. We've got the overarching data, we've got the quantitative side of analysis. We now want the qualitative and the local understanding, and we'll feed that together to produce the report by the end of this financial year. And from there, we've got our intentions, as mentioned previously, to overlay that with car data, active travel mapping, and the local development intentions as well.
So could I just add there, Caris, you can move on, that's fine. Just for the benefit of members in particular, these technical data sets such as CitySwift and INRIX, I appreciate these are technical terms, but these are data sets and forms of modelling which are accessible to you at local authority level, but you would have had to pay consultancy fee to access them. So what we're hoping here in terms of a new way of working is, because Transport for Wales holds licenses for data like this, that we can collaborate on your behalf and essentially save you a lot of time, in terms of capital and in terms of staff time to understand and then interrogate these data sets. So obviously we're picking that up in a more discerned way with your technical officers, but just worth you being aware of that distinction really, and that we think is probably a much more efficient way of working in the public sector.
Yeah, so at this point, I'll hand over to Owain just to talk us through the best data specifically. Thanks, Owain.
Shemai Paub, I'm Owain. I'm an assistant transport planner, and I've been supporting Caris and Ben on these projects. Just initially to pick up on Ben's point, CitySwift is real-time information that all bus operators are feeding into. And we've got this large data thing, which I've used initial analysis where I've got data from the October 2022 to October 2023, so a whole year of rich data. And with this, you can look at different bus routes and things like this, and I've ranked this data into demand, profitability, unwanted dwell time, and concessionary. Next slide, please. So this approach and this study output is we prioritize bus routes now by passenger demand and dwell time, and through that we identify the slow areas or journey speeds where the bus is traveling at its slowest, and then we identify the greatest need for improvement of delivery of that bus routes. And from an individual scale, this is not that powerful, but when you look at whole sections of buses or different routes, you really kind of get a regional perspective, and you can identify it much easier and bring a lot of benefit to the region. Next slide, Cass. So here is an example of a ranking here. So on the left-hand side column, we have all the different bus routes. of the region effectively, and then I've ranked them in demand, profitability, dwell time, and then also the final column on the right is dwell time, rank, and dwell time demand added together. So that would highlight the areas which have the most passengers but also are impacted by the most demand. Next slide, please. So how do we get a regional perspective? This initial approach is really focused on high density areas, and so as a case, Swansea's bus routes are really quite dominated in the initial analysis. So we had to do some thinking around this and figure out that in City Swift, it categorizes by depots. And so we've done the analysis, one by including Swansea's depot, and then again by excluding it to get a whole perspective of the region. Next slide, please.
Could I just ask, sorry, jump in. What do you mean dominated the initial numbers then?
So we've used passenger demand as so the amount of passengers on a bus as a key metric for this study.
All right, okay.
And so the most popular bus routes are where the most people live.
Right.
But just because it's pulling, as an initial analysis, it's dealing with this in absolute numbers. So if you just ask it a very crude question and say, show us the bus routes which have, the top 20 bus routes then that have the most number of people traveling on them, well, obviously it's going to pick out the bus routes we're running through areas where you have the most people, in terms of hoovering them up. So it's not, in terms of pre-selecting, it's just because it's been a crude question now, it's not been to the exclusion of, but obviously then what Owen's about to touch on here is we've expanded that analysis to make sure that those bigger numbers in the Swansea Bay area, sort of Llanelli to Talbot, aren't drowning out everything else, because obviously there are very socially necessary, journeys elsewhere in the region. So we'll get to that. It's just to highlight, if you ask it a crude question, it'll give you a crude answer in that sense.
Right, okay, thank you. I was just going to say we've got a lot of theoretical bus routes in Swansea, just not many buses.
Well, yeah, and I suppose, sorry, just on that point, because I think this again may be lost on a number of people on the call. Really, to have these sorts of numbers is quite remarkable, right? So I've worked in transport planning in South West Wales, as you'd be aware, for sort of 15 years. We've never had consistent bus data like this. Now, a lot of this is when you really get into this commercially sensitive data, so we can't show you everything today, but to actually see on a consistent basis how many people are on the bus, how many of those are fare paying, how many are concessionary, stuff. I imagine that's sort of data that you'd probably rightly imagine the public sector would have access to, but we have not. And outside of very specific data sharing agreements that have existed in different parts of the region, it hasn't been there. And so it's often then, it's based on sort of, I don't know, professional experience on the part of your public transport managers, which won't be far off, but it was rarely based in absolute numbers where we can, boil down how much is a particular service worth to us, both in terms of pounds and pence and in terms of how many people are on that service, because obviously those are slightly different things. So we can have a far more nuanced discussion as to the relative value of each service with this system, really. So sorry, Owen, stealing your thunder.
That's fine. So the next example, these are kind of next section here. We're looking at examples of what this study output is actually going to be. So here is an example of the T1 bus route. And as you can see, it actually has quite high total demand. But if you compare it to the profitability, it's actually quite low. So then if we look at the unwanted dwell time or rank of unwanted dwell time, it's actually quite as high. So it shows that this bus route is being impacted by a lot of dwell time that's actually impacting the profitability. So if we go on to the next slide. And so when I said one of the outputs is looking at the slow areas between bus routes, or the slow average journeys times. And so along the T1 route here, it's highlighted that through Aberon, this is where the bus is really slowing down and where potential for further investigation into how we can improve the bus route. Now we'll give you another example. So this is now the 87, which goes through Talbot. And it's a similar example. It's got really high demand, the profit, but it's not making any money. And then it's also got quite high unwanted dwell time. And so then we did the same analysis, looked into the areas where what is causing this delay, why is it? And so we looked through here, and this is an example of around this roundabout, just through this bus route. This is where the delay is really happening. And so this could be what our approach is. This lends it to the next stage is we engage with local authorities. We talk to them about this area, because I think we've had an initial discussion with Port Talbot, and they say this bus route actually is profitable now, but they've done a little tweaks to the bus route before, after we started this study. But so this example is showing that there's further investigation that needs to be happening, and this could be a potential where this could be. Next slide, please. So this is time points along each route assessed if the bus is running on time. I think from our analysis, there's been a consistent kind of theme with all bus routes that actually, as the bus travels throughout the day, it's in the evening, PM or PM peak, is where the serious delay is actually happening. Next slide. So just for kind of more of analysis and getting a better understanding, is we've cross-referenced this with INRIX data on the areas where we highlight where there's slow average speed to see if this is actually a congestion issue or if it's actually specific for the bus. So like if it's a layover between bus drivers changing and things like this, to have a bit more information when we engage with the local authority, we can go, yes, we can see there's congestion here and it's also impacting the bus route. Next slide. So just to repeat about the output, this project is trying to give a regional perspective of the bus network, bring local knowledge and data together to create a solid starting point on how we improve the bus network, identify problems and start the process to finding the solutions. Next slide. So next steps, as Karis mentioned before, we're going to engage with the local government and colleagues and stakeholders to understand the bus routes, to look at areas where we've seen, okay, there's something going on here. What do you guys know? How can you feed into this? And then also with this approach, we understand the operational costs, and that could be improved in the bus infrastructure and how that could actually help the operational cost. And finally, we're going to look at mobile phone data to develop an approach that looks into future bus routes. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Owain. So I think just to finish that particular section off and really oversimplify what Owain's just said, I think with a bit more analysis, we're not far off. This work's all been done quite quickly, just in the past, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks probably, and hasn't been done elsewhere in TFW to date. So it's something that's very much evolving. But we think quite quickly, and it's something we'll deal with your transport officers on. We think for the purposes of, say, your regional transport plan, we'd be able to output what are your top 20, top 10 by region, or whatever subdivision, the worst delayed bus routes in the region, for example, and then for your regional transport plan to potentially target and look and say, well, why is that? Now, some of the delay you've seen on your screen, that particularly those with you with local knowledge may say, well, I know why that is, and it's either a function of just local geography, there's nothing you can do about it, or it may be local congestion, so is there something you could do about it? So it's just simplifying a complex problem, which hopefully then can inform your regional transport plan program development for improvement over the coming years of that plan. So yeah, we hope that's a useful asset and something we'll continue to collaborate with your colleagues on. So Karis is going to pick up now on some of our transport modelling capabilities to finish off.
Yeah, hi again all. So I'm just going to talk you through some of the abilities that our internal strategic transport analysis team have, specifically with regards to the South West and Mid Wales transport model, which a few of you may have heard of previously or be familiar with. So the model is owned by the Welsh Government but managed by TfW and covers West and Mid Wales, but specifically it's got an increased level of detail around the key urban settlements. So the model is representative of highways and public transport demand for the region, it uses the base year 2019, but with 2 subsequent years as forecast years. Sorry. We recognise that this was pre-COVID data though, and so an exercise was undertaken last year to update the model with post-COVID data. So that's data that was gathered from 2022, and that has now been completed, that exercise. So we have pre and post-COVID data included in the model. If we look at what the model is capable of producing, here's an example. So this is just some sector analysis. So this has been provided previously to the CJC. Excuse me. And it's just a reflection of the movement of trips in the region. So these have been ranked as a top 20 trips in terms of origin and destination, so to and from journeys. And is based on the largest movements. And again, this is taken from model year 2019. So these would be pre-COVID journeys shown on your screen now. Excuse me. And those sectors shown are shown on the graphic in front of you now regionally. So just to give you an idea of how the region has been split up to reflect that data. But the model's got quite a few uses. So here's a few examples of what it has been used for to date. So just to give you an example, we're using the model at the moment to support the Swansea Bay and West Wales rail improvements. So it's being used in terms of our frequency enhancements, but also at the moment we're using it in terms of understanding what the origin and what the origin and destinations are, but also what the outline demand might be for each of the proposed stations. And now, if we look at the examples of the types of data that's available from the model, and the associated baseline data, such as mobile phone data, you can see how it can be tailored to suit different needs. So different local authorities or different sectors in the region might be wanting to undertake some modelling, but to suit different requirements. And that's something that we are able to achieve. So highly recommend speaking with our transport analysis team with any ideas you may have. It's specifically having these conversations that have also informed the bus study that Owain was just discussing as well, although not using the model that we've spoken to today, but actually just utilising data from City Swift. So yeah, well worthwhile. If you have any ideas, then please do feel free to speak or ask any questions of our team. Yeah, we're sorry that no one from the team could be on the call today. We are happy to provide their details if you do want to discuss this in further detail though. And that was a whistle-stop tour. I'm very sorry of what our team are capable of helping with. Any questions?
Great, thank you very much, Carys, and Ben, and Owen as well. So yeah, lots of data there that we need to be taking advantage of, really, isn't it? Oes yna unrhyw gwestiwn? Are there any questions from members? There was one there in particular on slide, is it 19? If you go back to slide 19 now, and we've sort of split the region up into that. I'm just wondering, the areas that we've got there, we've got 4 areas, and we the 4 areas. What are the drivers for those boundaries, I suppose, would be my question. Is it population? What? Yeah.
It's concentration of movement. So essentially, at a strategic transport planning level. So I suppose not to prejudge your experience, but those of you who may have dealt with, say, transport assessments that came, say, through the planning channel, you'll have seen sometimes outputs from transport models that deal with, a junction into a new housing development, for example. This is slightly different than that because obviously it's dealing with a layer of information greater. So this, large southwestern mid area itself is chunked up into travel areas, into and out of, within the transport model, because it's dealing with a huge amount of data, a lot of which is derived through mobile phone. But then in the coloured areas, there's an extra level of detail within those where you can see a greater level of granularity of travel within those town centres, because there's just so much more going on in there. I don't think these numbers are up to date now, but just to give you a feel for what's included in the model, in the first iteration, the model was built from a travel matrix. So they essentially, how do I explain this in summary form now? We purchased en masse big data, mobile phone data from one of the big mobile providers. And from that, you can triangulate people's positions traveling through not just this part of Wales, but the whole of Wales and the whole of the UK. And obviously it's all anonymized, and it's done at a granular level where you can't see people going from an individual address, etc. So you address that that piece itself. But within the database, just for the Swansea area, I think it was actually at the time, there were 1.2 million trips in the database over a 2-week period. So you can imagine, if you draw that focus out further to encompass an area of this size, how many trips are included in there. It's a massive amount of data. And so just on the basis of a law of averages, you can draw some really interesting conclusions from this. So that was sort of the point I suppose Caris was making, was that recently that data set's been updated. So we've now got a good post-COVID data set, because we all know travel patterns have changed since then, and then for these granular areas. So I think really the significance of the coloured areas then is, if you had a specific inquiry in those areas, we probably already hold the data. But say, let's pick Lampeter, just as a case in point, there isn't as detailed a level of modelling for Lampeter. So if you came to us and said, we've got a real big problem, a big development that's landing there, what data have you got? We may have to do a little bit more work to do that. Whereas for these areas where you've got more detailed modelling, is probably ready to go. And obviously those coloured areas represent a big chunk of where the big developments would land in that sense. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks very much. I'm just wondering, I'm just looking at the green bit there. So the Swansea, Neath, Talbot, Llanelli area, for example. I know sort of the northern edge of that, it's just to the south of Almanford. So,
yeah.
If you look at it, obviously you've got the M4 corridor there. Now, population-wise, to the north of the M4 corridor within the city and county of Swansea, there's nothing there. It's just the Mawr constituency. So it goes all the way up to Garnsut, which is a village of something like 50 houses, if that. So I'm just wondering, whether there's scope to extend that to the north, because clearly a mile or two to the north of Garnsut, you've got Ammanford, which is the third biggest town in Carmarthen. That's what I'm trying to get to, really.
I think on those, so you're quickly going to get to a point where you're going to exhaust me and Caris's ability to sort of advise. But our transport planning colleagues would happily come and give you that detail in a future session. But I think I can imagine at a strategic level in particular, because remember it's a strategic model, with a town like Ammanford, predominantly I would imagine you'll have a north-south travel into this area. And I think Caris, if you go on to the last slide before our email addresses come up, just as a case in point really, you've got a volumetric flow on there. Can you see this plan on the top right? Just to get, and again, that is sort of information you would just know intrinsically because you live and work in this part of the country. But it's that sort of a flow where you can see where the predominantly heavy highway movements are that will drive the way they sector up the model. But in terms of why certain areas are in and out, I'd have to 100% sort of, I'd have to relay you to my colleagues. And like I said, it may well be that this is something we could focus on with a future session for you, to show what we have got and what we haven't really in that area, and what the limitations of the model are as well, because that's important to understand too.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Right, sorry. Wyndham, do you want to come in? Nope, you're on mute, Wyndham.
Thank you, Chair. I just, I don't know if I'm on the right track but this is the South Wales Regional Transport Plan, and I'm thinking now, my understanding is now that when the new franchises come out, Neath and Talbot will be grouped with Swansea and Bridgend. So would this data be helpful for us in our contest, because it's out of the regional transport plan? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very reasonable question. So there are proposed franchise areas, but for bus, just for clarity, for those of you who
Yeah, but
that's not right, yeah. So there are proposed franchise areas, which is still subject to discussion with local authorities, principally in the first instance. I'm not sure if they've been published, but perhaps if you've seen them, perhaps they have been. But yeah, you're quite right that is the case. But there is a complementary transport model for the southeast. So in terms of having uniformity of the sorts of things we're describing, that's covered. Why it would be split Neath to Talbot in that sense, I mean, I can imagine why, but it'd be better if I had my bus colleagues here to advise on that, to give you a full advice and picture on that particular issue. But I think substantively, at the minute, there's an option that sort of broadly would encompass, well, the busiest parts of the map as shown on here within a single area, just because you're trying to obviously contain those travel movements within sectors.
But so there is the possibility of having sort of cross CJC franchises, and that's something that's being looked at, is it?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's something we're just starting to discuss now with your transport planning colleagues and heads of service. So there are proposed bus networks for the future. So obviously, at the minute, the Senedd are considering the bus franchise bill, and all being well, that is supposed to receive royal assent by December of this year, with a view to franchising coming in sometime thereafter. So those discussions are ongoing at the minute with your public transport managers, because again, I suppose in a similar vein to a lot of work that Transport for Wales do, we can probably produce you 60-70% of what we think the correct answer is, and then it has to be washed through you as local stakeholders to say, yeah, but this cul-de-sac, that's not going to work, and there's a hill by here that you haven't thought about, and to sense check it in that way. So it's that sort of level of checking that's now going on with your public transport managers, and I think that back and forth seems to be going quite well at the minute, but we've got to make an awful lot of ground this year. I mean, Councillor Sinnott was saying on the way in, he was discussing bus services this morning, and I appreciate it's taken a huge amount of your time as local political representatives. And I think we can all see that the bus services at present are not where we'd like them to be. And so we'd very much hope that this new approach in Wales might lead to something better. But I think at the same time, you'll all appreciate we mustn't be naive as to how complex it's going to be to achieve that. We're adopting a lot of new powers, and we'll need a lot of new skills in Wales that have not been exercised to date. So certainly something we'll be speaking to your officers about, and at an opportune moment, I think it would be good for us to bring that back to you at CJC level to discuss as well. But obviously, I'm just cautious we don't do that too early, because we are, very much still getting those plans in place. And obviously, first and foremost, I want your officers and the technical officers to be broadly happy with that approach before we bring it to you as members.
Great, thanks, Ben. Dave, you had your hand up. Did you want to come in, Dave? Or
I think Wyndham actually covered my point really about the franchise areas. But it's very early days for the members on the call, but there will be cross-regional differences in the franchise areas produced. But it's important, Ben, as you will appreciate, that we make sure all of this modelling data gets into the bus working group as well. Really powerful, and really a comment, Chair, really powerful information, particularly where we can perhaps enhance the infrastructure to improve bus reliability and to develop the network as well. We touched upon, okay, we've let contracts now for next financial year across the Southwest region, but I think it's fair to say that we'd like to see a better network, and members will have some resonance with that position, because they'd all like to see wider improvements on the network. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Mike?
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Diolch yn fawr. Gwybodaeth y cwestiwn fi, ac gwybodaeth â chi ar un slaid, a beth yw'r LDP. Nawr mae LDP unen gyda'r Parc Genedlaethol, a byddech chi'n edrych ar hwnna hefyd, chymod, gyda'r LDP y Cyngor Sir, achos o fewn yr LDP, i ni yn siarad a bwyty buses, y bus, routes o bws. Ydy hwnna rhywbeth byddech chi'n edrych ar?
So I'd have to just confirm with colleagues that just in case, for some reason, Pembrokeshire Coast National Park's been omitted, but LDP has certainly been included in, say, transport modelling exercises previously. I see no reason why it should have been, but it's it is possible that it's been excluded. So I just check. And really, in terms of the transport modelling, it's included because any large development, within the transport model, you want to be able to forecast out and say, well, how much additional demand, whether that be on the highways or on the public transport network, will there be? And you want to model that to see what its impact would be. So that's the driver. So within the transport model as is now, there isn't a future LDP growth driver on there, but I'll confirm whether Pembrokeshire is included. I'll take that away as an action. And then what hasn't been done to date is in terms of the this particular piece where we're saying, so how are the buses performing now, and are there new things coming through the new LDPs that are being refreshed that we need to think about in terms of new bus links? That bit hasn't been done, but we need to as part of the programme that was shown in the slide deck. So yeah, lovely to have met you today, and certainly would be happy to come back and incorporate things in your areas if they haven't been already.
Great, diolch Ben, thanks very much for that. Oes yna gwestiynau pellach? Are there any further comments or questions? No, if not, I think the report is there for noting, isn't it? It's there for context. Really. Obviously, there's a lot of work here that we'll need to take forward over the next few months and years. So, diolch Ben, thank you Ben and colleagues for the presentation, and there's no doubt we'll be returning to lots of that stuff and lots of that rich data, particularly in the bus and the car data that we need to delve into deeper, isn't it? So, diolch yn fawr, thank you very much for that.
Thank you as well. Thank you for your generosity. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, diolch. Right, so with that then, if members are happy, it's just for noting, so we don't need a formal vote. So we can move on then to item 5, which is the case for change. Obviously, as we develop the RTP, the report starts on page 49 of the agenda and seeks the formal approval of the subcommittee for the case for change, which will be submitted, of course, to the Corporate Joint Committee in due course before being submitted to Welsh Government. So can I ask officers then to say a few words in terms of introducing the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to bring in Lee White. I think he's on the call now. Is he? Chloe, is he?
Yeah, I'm here, Stuart.
Yes, oh, that's it. Sorry, I couldn't. Faces all around. So, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I could introduce Lee White to you. Lee's been brought in to help assist with the delivery of the regional transport plan and support officers and give us that extra capacity and expertise. So, Lee's been helping pull this together. So, if I could let him give a bit of an introduction, a bit of background to it, then that would be that's okay with you, Chair.
Absolutely, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, Lee, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart, for that introduction. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I think the starting point, just to say before I kick off into the detail, there is one important change that has come up in discussions to the actual case for change paper. It's on page 62 of the agenda pack, and it's table 3. There will be an updated table 3 incorporated. Chloe's obviously going to deal with the mechanics of that, but rest assured the table covers rail trips from Swansea. We've now increase the size of that table to include rail trips from Haverfordwest, Neath and Carmarthen. So just an update there for members to be aware of as the discussion takes place. Chloe, I'll leave you to circulate that amendment as you need to into the process side of things. So then in terms of the regional transport strategy, as Ben noted at the beginning of his section on the bus network and the modelling, the implementation plan was approved by the CJC and by the Welsh Government as well. So we started off on time, and thank you, Ben, for the comments there that I think were really appreciated by everyone. The next stage in the process is to develop what is called the case for change. And the case for change is effectively a document that sets out where we are now, where do we need to go, and then looking at some of the areas where we believe the change is actually required. There's also, to wrap the document up, there is a draft of our engagement strategy that is needed because we need to set that out quite clearly. And there's also the process that leads to effectively the integrated impact assessment that follows from that, the various consultation exercises that we need to do. I think it's fair to say the timescales are tight for the RTP, so getting the case for change approved is a really important step. The starting point for the document is Llwynarbyr Neath. It also ties into a number of the other regional strategy documents that I know everyone is working on, and the drivers around the region for change. So there's lots of growth, there's lots of economic activity that we want to be served by the transport network. So that's where we're starting from. We're looking at the transport strategy in terms of opportunity. I think it's fair to say we're very much driven by the opportunity this presents. I think Ben and colleagues highlighted some of those opportunities there around the bus in particular, but clearly there are opportunities around rail, around the metro concept. Can we apply that to bus is probably a key question. So what this document is doing is setting out those almost the gaps in effect. It's a piece of gap analysis that gives us a direction for travel for the next stage, which we'll pick up using a lot of the data Ben and colleagues have talked about this afternoon. That's probably the introduction, Chair. I think the one final comment I would make is that it does start to drive the integration with the other policies of the CJC, and particularly the land use planning agenda. Obviously, that's going to be an ongoing discussion as the regional transport plan evolves. But I think it's important that we're making that bridge at the earliest possible opportunity into the land use planning side of the equation. I think that's all I can say at the moment, Chair, in terms of an opening. And obviously, I'm sure there's going to be some worthwhile discussion now, so appreciate that. I just wondered, Chair, if Chloe wanted to highlight how the change that I highlighted at the beginning is going to be made. Obviously, there's a procedure now, isn't there, Chloe, to get that into members' inboxes.
Yeah, that's absolutely correctly. Just to confirm that I've been sent the additional information from Lee. So I don't know if, Chair, you would like to see that before questions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy if you've got that and you can share it. So just to give a bit of context to other members in the college, obviously, just in initial discussions with officers when we received the papers last week, obviously one thing I felt was on page 62, when you've got the table there, which sort of outline the journeys from Swansea in terms of the rail context. I just felt it was important, really, if we're developing a regional transport plan, that we get similar figures for the other main stations in the different counties. So as Lee mentioned there, Haverfordwest, Carmarthen and Neath in particular as the main stations in those counties. I think it's important just to get those figures, just to provide some context, you know, because clearly we talk about future plans, but I think the data in terms of flows from Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire and Neath, Port Talbot are just as important as those in Swansea. So that was the request from myself, and to be fair, Lee has been working over the past few days to pull those figures together. So I'm happy to move that formally as an amendment if members are happy later on. But it might be useful if we can share the screen just to provide that context. It might be useful now, Chloe. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. I'll just share my screen. Bear with me. Can you see the table?
Yeah.
Yep, so this is the additional information that Lee sent across to me. Lee, I don't know if you want to add anything onto this?
I think just very briefly, Chloe, the four main stations in each of the local authority areas are listed across the top. The overall number of trips is listed at the side of that particular station. So in the top line, you've got Swansea and the 739,000 trips. Just to highlight, this is from 2021-2022 financial year. The data for 2022 to 2023 will be issued at the end of February. So obviously we can update this as we go with the latest information, or circulate that as well for information after the CJC committee process has been run through. I think the only other thing to note is obviously it's in the main report, but these are single trips, and the data does assume that everybody that leaves a particular station comes back there. So these are one-way trips. I think it's keen to emphasise. So Swansea actually sees just over 1.5 million entries and exits a year. So that's just the technical data behind this, that these are actually single trips. So I think the commentary is actually in the case for change report, Chloe. So I won't dwell on that, but just to highlight that's how the table works. Do read down the column for your particular station that's there.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. Yeah, and I think there'll be time to delve into that, but of course it does tell of a story there. I mean, I'm just looking at the Carmarthen figures there, and the fact that over 30,000 actually went to head east further than Swansea's net, so when we talk about the SDL, for example, there's a clarity there. Okay, great. So that's fine. So thanks for that, Lee. So just in terms of making progress, then are members happy with that inclusion? And are there any questions on the report in full? I know there's a lot of work that's gone into it. I'm really grateful for the work that officers have put in to get to this point. I know that timescales have been tight, but certainly from my point of view, I think it certainly sets out the challenges, and I'm particularly pleased to see the sort of rural element reference there as well within the report, because I think that's an important context that we need to be mindful of as this plan is developed. So thanks very much for that. Chloe, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to note here that once members have asked any questions, if you could just bring me back in just to go through the formal process of making the amendment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously take questions first.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. Are there any queries, any questions, any comments from members, or are you quite content with what's in front of us? Yeah, quite content. I don't see any concerns. Okay, there we are then. So if that's the case, I'm happy to move formally then that we endorse the case for change in respect of the RTP, subject to the inclusion of the additional rail journey data, which we've just seen on the screen, and that it is submitted then to the South West Wales CJC for approval and onward submission to Welsh Government to meet the requirements of the RTP mandate. So that's formally been put. Could I ask for a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Wyndham. That's a seconder. And therefore, could I ask for members, as it's become the substantive recommendation, to show with raising your hands if you were in support of that substantive recommendation?
I can
Andrew?
confirm that has been moved, Chair, unanimously. Just to confirm, I've popped the recommendation, the amended recommendation, into the chat in case anybody wanted to refer back to it, just what the recommendation will now read.
There we are. Great, wonderful. Thank you very much. So that's been approved then. So that will go forward now then to the CJC Joint Committee in a few weeks' time. Okay, so that's the business for this afternoon. There aren't any further items. There aren't any urgent.
Chair, I can see, sorry to interrupt, I can see Councillor Rees-Sinnett's hand is up.
Oh, yes, well spotted.
Yeah, I thought you were ignoring me, Darren. No,
Yeah.
I just wondering if you could outline for me the next steps once it gets to the regional CJC. What happens after that?
Yeah, well, assuming the CJC accept it, that will then be submitted to Welsh Government for approval. In terms of timescales, I'm not quite sure what the timescales are in terms of approval at a Welsh Government level. Are we clear on that? Is anybody able to provide some guidance on that?
Not 100% sure. We have to submit by the end of the month, by the 31st, Chair. As I'm expecting that we should hear back relatively quickly. As was mentioned by Lee, the timescales are incredibly challenging, and I think it's been mentioned in the previous time for the development of the RTP. It is something that we do need to take a good, honest view as to what we can deliver in the timescales and have some discussions around that. But I would expect, I don't know, Ben, if you know anything from Welsh Government on that as to how long they're anticipating the turnaround on this. But my understanding is it'll be relatively quick in terms of the response back.
Yeah, I believe so, and I think the case for change is not a particularly detailed document, and Stuart and myself and a few others on the call have been having conversations, between local government, Welsh Government, and Transport for Wales to make sure that this report you're endorsing now is broadly in acceptance. Obviously, you can't prejudge and presuppose Welsh Government's approval, but it should be straightforward. And I think, as Stuart said, those timescale constraints are well understood, and so it really is important that we enable you to press on as soon as possible.
Yeah, and as I say, we've made those concerns known in terms of the timescales and the resource implications as well. But some of those have been touched on today in terms of Ben's introduction. Rhys, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, briefly, please, Chair, if that's okay. So, because there's very little to disagree with the document, that it's just almost like a state of the nation, really, or the state of the West Wales nation. But it's for me, it's what happens after it's all approved, then, and it comes back to us approved by Welsh Government. Is that where the detailed sort of the granularity of the projects that make up the plan will then be kind of thrashed out? Is that is that the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Darren, do you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I was just looking at some future dates which we've been planning, for this committee, in terms of the future work programme to try and answer Rhys's query. So after the case for change and subject to approval that was discussed there by Stuart, we'll be working on the initial draft of the RTP and other elements of work, which, some of these dates, are not cast in stone at the moment in terms of committee schedules, but we're looking to come back in early May to the Transport Subcommittee with the initial draft. Final draft then would be in October, and then the final RTP itself would be coming back to the Transport Subcommittee next March before we submit it to Welsh Government next March. So that's only a very quick run through just to give you a feel for the sort of outline of work ahead. I hope that helps, Chair.
No, that's very useful. Thanks very much, Darren. But as I say, it's challenging, and that's something that's been recognised by us, and we have lobbied Welsh Government on that point in particular in terms of the timescales, because obviously there was a delay in terms of the guidance, and again we've touched on the resource implications as well. But we will do whatever we can given the resource that we've got. That's all we can do realistically, and I'm sure that Welsh Government will appreciate that and acknowledge that given the situation that we find ourselves in. Stuart, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just I guess pointing one of the next steps is there'll be a letter going out imminently for key stakeholders, just to basically give them the heads up and get their initial view on the case for change. But there is a lot of work in terms of with the consultation to come forward. So it's certainly something that we need to try and get some timetable of different events and things in terms of consultation. That's certainly a key priority ahead, really. So thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, but I think, Rich, you're spot on there. I mean, this is a state of the nation stuff. This is where we are. This is where we recognise the challenge. The difficult bit might be to get that agreement in terms of priorities, and then we are into the realm of lines and detailed data and all the rest of it. But that's the task ahead, isn't it? So for now, we've been asked to agree, and we have done the case for change. So hopefully we'll get some feedback from Welsh Government quickly, and then we can crack on then with the next stage. Great, right. So there aren't any further items or any urgent items as far as I'm aware. So if that's the case, can I thank you all for your attendance today, and can I thank all officers for their work on this over the past few months to get us to this point. It really is appreciated. We do understand the pressures that are on you, and are grateful for the work that you've done so far. So diolch yn fawr chi gyd, thank you very much, and we shall speak again soon. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr.
Good, yeah.
Diolch.